All right, let's go ahead and do another book. I'm going to go ahead and do the Openstax Sociology. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing I've been doing with the algebra book, but I'm going to try it with sociology. See what notes I can get in here. So, Chapter 1, An Introduction to Sociology. Chapter outline, What is Sociology? 1.2, The History of Sociology. 1.3, Theoretical Perspectives on Sociology. 1.4, Why Study Sociology? So, 10:7. Let's get that there. 20:58. That's when I'm starting. Okay, introduction. A busy commuter train station might seem like a very individualized place. Tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of strangers flow through with a singular purpose to get where they need to go. Whether walking through main doors at a pace of a dozen people per second or arriving by train hundreds at a time, the station can feel like a bit of a balloon being pumped too full. Throngs of people cluster in tight bottlenecks until they burst through corridors and stairways and tunnels to reach the next stage of their journey. In some stations, walking against the crowd can be a tedious, very nearly impossible process. Sorry. And cutting across a river of determined commuters can be almost dangerous. Things are fast, relentless, and necessary. But are those 100,000 or a half million, or in the case of Tokyo's Shinjuku Station, 3.5 million people really acting individually? It may seem surprising, but even with those numbers, strangers from across cities can sync up on the same schedules, use the same doors, take one leg of the trip together every day before separating into different directions. After just a few months, faces can become familiar and senses can be tuned. An experienced commuter can tell where another person is going according to their pace and whatever announcement just went out. They may slow up a bit to let the other person pass or hold the door open just a bit longer than usual, certain that someone will grab the handle behind them. Many regulars don't need to check the schedule board. They sense whether the train is running late or whether a track is changed simply by the movement of the crowd. And then the customs develop. Which side to walk on, how fast to go, where to stand, how much space to leave between people on the escalator. When you board early, which seat should you take? When you see someone running for the train, do you jam the closing door with your foot? How does the crowd treat people who ask for food or money? What's the risk level in telling someone to be quiet? Very few of these behaviors are taught. None are written down, but the transit hub, that pocket of constant flow, is an echo of its society. It takes on some aspects of the city and country around it, but its people also form an informal group of their own. Sociologists, as you will learn, may study these people. Sociologists may seek to understand how they feel about their trip, be it proud or annoyed or just plain exhausted. Sociologists might study how length of commute relates to job satisfaction or family relationships. They may study the ways that conditions of a train station affect attitudes about government, or how the difficulty of commuting may lead people to relocate. This understanding isn't just a collection of interesting facts, it can influence government, policy, and spending decisions, employer interventions, and healthcare practices. The work sociologists do to understand our society and the work you will do in learning about it is meaningful to our lives and our futures. 1.1, What is sociology? So, 10:7, 21:02. By the end of this section, you should be able to explain concepts central to sociology, describe how different sociological perspectives have developed. What are society and culture? So, pre. What do I think about it? I just think society is a conglomeration of people or objects with some similar attribute. Culture is the way people express in society. That's what I think. Sociology is a scientific and systematic study of groups and group interactions, societies, and social interactions, from small and personal groups to very large groups. A group of people who live in a defined geographic area, who interact with one another, and who share common culture is what sociologists call society. Sociologists study all aspects and levels of society. Sociologists working from the micro level study small groups and individual interactions, while those using macro level analysis look at trends among the and between large groups and societies. For example, a micro level study might look at the accepted rules of convert conversation in various groups, such as among teenagers or business professionals. In contrast, a macro level analysis might research the ways that language use has changed over time or in social media outlets. The term culture refers to the group's shared practices, values, and beliefs. Culture encompasses a group's way of life, from routine everyday interactions to the most important parts of group members' lives. It includes everything produced by a society, including all the social rules. Sociologists often study culture using the sociological imagination, which pioneer C. Wright Mills described as an awareness of the relationship between a person's behavior and experience and the wider culture that shaped the person's choices and perceptions. It's a way of seeing our own and other people's behavior in relationship to history and social structure. One illustration of this is a person's decision to marry. In the United States, this choice is heavily influenced by individual feelings. However, the social acceptability of marriage relative to the person's circumstances also plays a part. So basically, it's saying that choice, I'll say greater than or equal to individual motivation plus group motivation. Remember, though, that culture is a product of the people in society. Sociologists take care not to treat the concept of culture as though it were alive and real. Oh, so that means culture is essentially death or a pause in, I'll say progress, because it's essentially, culture is essentially choices that people make because other people made it. Or the goal is to make other people make it. The error of treating an abstract concept as though it has a real material existence is known as reification. Studying patterns, how sociologists view societies. All sociologists are interested in the experiences of individuals and how these experiences are shaped by interactions with social groups and society. To sociologists, the personal decision an individual makes do not exist in a vacuum. Cultural patterns, social forces, and influences put pressures on people to select one choice over another. Sociologists try to identify these general patterns by examining the behavior of large groups of people living in the same society and experiencing the same societal pressures. Consider the changes in U.S. families. The typical family in past decades consisted of married parents living in a home with their unmarried children. Today, the percent of unmarried couples, same sex couples, single parent, and single adult households is increasing, as well as the number of expanded households in which extended family members such as grandparents, cousins, or adult children live together in the family home. While 15 million mothers still make up the majority of single parents, 3.5 million fathers are also raising their children alone, according to the U.S. Census Bureau in 2020. Increasingly, single people and cohabitating couples are choosing to raise children outside of marriage through surrogates or adoption. Some sociologists study social facts The laws, morals, values, religious beliefs, customs, fashions, rituals, and cultural rules that govern social life. They may contribute to these changes in the family. Do people in the United States view marriage and family differently over the years? Do they view them differently than Peruvians? Do employment and economic conditions play a role in families? Other sociologists are studying the consequences of these new patterns, such as the ways children influence and are influenced by them and or the changing needs for education, housing, and healthcare. Sociologists identify and study patterns related to all kinds of contemporary social issues. The stop and frisk policy, the emergence of new political factions, how Twitter influences everyday communication, these are all examples of topics that sociologists might explore. Studying part and whole, how sociologists view social structures. I think I'm reading a little too fast. I might need to talk a little bit more. I just haven't really seen a whole lot of things to talk about. Sorry. I think this is just all common sense stuff. A key component of the sociological perspective is the idea that the individual and society are inseparable. That's actually pretty important. It is impossible to study one without the other. Yep, if you don't have people, you can't have a society. I guess you could have social groups of animals and stuff, but how would we know that if you don't have people to study it? If the human sense is not paying attention to it, if the eyes, ears, and other sensory information is not doing anything, then it's not receiving anything. So it is impossible to study one without the other. German sociologist Norbert Elias called the process of simultaneously analyzing the behavior of individuals and the society that shapes that behavior figuration. Consider religion. While people experience religion in a distinctly individual manner, religion exists in a larger social context as a social institution. For instance, an individual's religious practice may be influenced by what government dictates, holidays, teachers, places of worship, rituals, and so on. These influences underscore the important relationship between individual practices of religion and social pressures that influence the religious experience. So there's a lot of different ways to express social interaction. In simpler terms, figuration means that as one analyzes the social institutions in a society, the individuals using that institution in any fashion need to be figured into the analysis. Sociology in the real world. Individual society connection. When sociologist Nathan Cairns spoke to his friend Ashley, a pseudonym, about the move she and her partner had made from an urban center to a small Midwestern town, he was curious about how the social pressures placed on a lesbian couple differed from one community to another. Ashley said that in the city, they had been accustomed to getting looks and hearing comments, and she and her partner walked hand in hand. Otherwise, she felt that they were at least being tolerated. There had been little to no outright discrimination. Things changed when they moved to the small town for her partner's job. For the first time, Ashley found herself experiencing discrimination because of her sexual orientation. Some of it was particularly hurtful. Landlords would not rent to them. Ashley, who is a highly trained professional, had a great deal of difficulty finding a new job. When Nathan asked Ashley if she and her partner became discouraged or bitter about this new situation, Ashley said that rather than letting it get to them, they decided to do something about it. Ashley approached groups at a local college and several churches in the area. Together they decided to form the town's first gay-straight alliance. The alliances worked successfully to educate their community about same-sex couples. It also worked to raise awareness about the kinds of discrimination that Ashley and her partner experienced in the town and how those could be eliminated. So I should circle that. I didn't mean to blur it out. That's an important word. What is education? And that's what I hope I can get an answer to with philosophy. Okay? The Alliance has become a strong advocacy group and is working to attain equal rights for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender or LGBTQ individuals. Cairns observed that this is an excellent example of how negative social forces can result in a positive response from individuals to bring about social change. Okay? 1.2, the history of sociology. 10.7. 2112. By the end of this section, you should be able to explain why sociology emerged when it did, describe how sociology became a separate academic discipline. For millennia, people have been fascinated by the relationships between individuals and societies. Many topics studied by ancient philosophers and their desire to describe an ideal society are still studied in modern sociology. So, still looking for answers, including theories of social conflict, economic, social cohesion, and power, in a continued attempt to describe an ideal society. Sourced Hannum 2003. Although we are more familiar with Western philosophers like Plato and his student Aristotle, Eastern philosophers also thought about social issues. Until recently, we have very few texts that are non religious in nature that theorize about social life. Well, that's because religion is more complex than most people will acknowledge. If you're religious, you're religious. If you're against religion, you're religious. Um, if you have ideas, in a way, you're religious because those ideas have to come from somewhere, and you get them from where you believe you do. If you think that you get them from other people, you get them from other people. If you think you get them from if you get them from other ideas, you get them from other ideas. But the thing with ideas is, with religion is, everyone has it to some degree. Everyone expresses it to some degree. And I would like to think that every person is analogous to what a church is. It's but it's more complex than that. And I'd have to get into uh, probably I'd have to get into signal. I think the theory of signals and stuff. So, but I'm not ready for that. So we'll come back to that idea later. From 4th century through the 19th century, the Catholic Church was a seat of power from today's Turkey in the east to Western and Northern Europe, including the British Isles. Only monks who were charged with rewriting holy texts by hand and the aristocracy were literate. Moreover, the church consolidated power. In the year 800, Pope Leo III named Charlemagne, the King of Francia, today's France, Belgium, Netherlands, and Germany, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, giving one individual control over most of Europe. Doing so gave the Catholic Church the power to maintain its own traditions, safeguard them from the influence of power practicing other religions. If any social patterns challenged any belief of the Church, those practitioners were massacred, burned at the stake, or labeled heretics. As a result, the records that we have are extremely subjective and do not offer an unbiased view of social practice. In the 13th century, Ma Tuanlin, a Chinese historian, was the first to record in his seminal encyclopedia titled General Study of Literary Remains the social dynamics underlying and generating historical development. In the 14th century, the Tunisian historian Ibn Khaldun set the foundation for both modern sociology and economics. Khaldun proposed a theory of social conflict and provided a comparison of nomadic and sedentary life, an analysis of political economy, and a study connecting a tribe's social cohesion to its capacity for power. Khaldun often challenged authorities. As sociologists continue to study and report on social issues and problems, they often find themselves in the center of controversy. From 1347 to 1522, the bubonic plague ravaged Europe, killing up to 35% of the population. The plague dealt a major blow to the credibility of the Catholic Church. Out of this chaos emerged the work of Copernicus, Galileo, Leonardo, Newton, Linnaeus, and other philosophers whose work sometimes contradicted church teachings. Events once held to be the product of the divine hand could be analyzed by human reason and observation and could be explained by scientific, testable, and retestable hypotheses. As literacy spread through conquests, colonization, more records and literature became available for sociologists and historians to put social puzzles together. In the 18th century, Enlightenment philosophers developed principles that could be used to explain social life. Thinkers such as John Locke, Francois-Marie Arouet, or Voltaire, Immanuel Kant, and Thomas Hobbes responded to what they saw as social ills by writing on topics they hoped would lead to social reform. Mary Wollstonecraft wrote about women's conditions in society. Like Harriet Martineau and Jane Addams, her works were long ignored by the male academic structure, but since the 1970s, Wollstonecraft has widely been considered the first feminist thinker of consequence. Ideas about systems, the family, health and hygiene, national offense and defense were among the many concerns of social life. The early 19th century saw great changes with the Industrial Revolution, increased mobility, and new kinds of employment. It was a period of increased trade, travel, and globalization that exposed many people for the first time to societies and cultures other than their own. Millions of people moved into cities, and many people turned away from their traditional religious beliefs. Ideas spread rapidly, groups were created, political decisions became public decisions. Among a new generation of philosophers, there were some who believed they could make sense of it all. Creating a discipline, European theorists. Auguste Comte, 1798 to 1857. The term sociology was first coined in 1780 by the French essayist Emmanuel Joseph Sayes in an unpublished manuscript. In 1838, the term was reintroduced by Auguste Comte. Comte originally studied to be an engineer, but later became a pupil of social philosopher Claude Henri de Ravoux-Comte de Saint-Simon. They both thought that social scientists could study society using the same scientific methods utilized in natural sciences. Comte also believed in a potential of social scientists to work toward the betterment of society. He held that once scholars identified the laws that govern society, sociologists could address problems such as poor education and poverty. Comte named the scientific study of social patterns positivism. He described his philosophy in a series of books called The Course in Positive Philosophy and A General View of Positivism. He believed that revealing the laws by which societies and individuals interact would usher in a new positivist age of history. While the field and its terminology have grown, sociologists still believe in the positive impact of their work. Harriet Martineau. Harriet Martineau introduced sociology to English-speaking scholars through her translation of Comte's writing from French to English. She was an early analyst of social practices, including economics, social class, religion, suicide, government, and women's rights. Her career began with Illustrations of Political Economy, a work educating ordinary people about the principles of economics. She later developed the first systematic methodological international comparisons of social institutions, and her two first most famous sociological works, Society in America and Retrospective Western Travel. Martineau found the workings of capitalism at odds with the professed moral principles of people in the United States. She pointed out the faults of the free enterprise system in which workers were exploited and impoverished while business owners became wealthy. Okay, so that's actually not a true statement. That's actually false. Basically, these industries took people out of poverty. Okay, got to think of it this way. So before jobs equals no jobs. So basically, skilled work, which means individual training. You would learn from someone who knew how to do it to learn how to do it yourself. Okay. But the thing is everyone, so before like the Industrial Revolution, everyone, besides very, very few people, were impoverished. Most people were basically just surviving to live. Okay. She further noted that the belief that all are created equal was inconsistent with the lack of women's rights. I also disagree with that. Just because a group of people who have power are against women's rights doesn't mean that the women's rights aren't supported by most people. It's just most people aren't willing to kill themselves and become martyrs. And that's the proof of that is just how society works. Like you can just look at it. Most people are not interfering with crime and all of that stuff. Most people are just kind of sitting by and letting their own thing kind of do the thing. Okay. Much like Mary Wollstonecraft, Martineau was often discounted in her own time because academic sociology was a male-dominated profession. Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a German philosopher and economist. In 1948, he and Friedrich Engels co-authored the Communist Manifesto. This book is one of the most influential political manuscripts in history. Sorry, I got the hiccups. Political manuscripts in history. It also presents Marx's theory of society, which differed from what Comte proposed. Marx rejected Comte's positivism. He believed that societies grew and changed as a result of the struggles between different social classes over the means of production. At the time he was developing his theories, the Industrial Revolution and the rise of capitalism led to great disparities in wealth between the owners of the factories and the workers. Capitalism, an economic system characterized by private or corporate ownership of goods and the means to produce them, had developed in many nations. Marx predicted that inequalities of capitalism would become so extreme that workers would eventually revolt. This would lead to the collapse of capitalism and would be replaced by communism. Communism is an economic system under which there is no private or corporate ownership. Everything is owned communally and distributed as needed. Marx believed that communism was a more equitable system than capitalism. However, the problem is, in reality, the worst humans always end up with the power. While his economic predictions did not materialize in the time he predicted, Marx's idea that social conflict leads to change in society is still one of the major theories used in modern sociology. Herbert Spencer, 1820 to 1903. In 1873, the English philosopher Herbert Spencer published The Study of Sociology, the first book with the term sociology in the title. Spencer rejected much of Comte's philosophy as well as Marx's theory of class struggle and his support of communism. Instead, he favored a form of government that allowed market forces to control capitalism. His work influenced many early sociologists, including Emile Durkheim. Spencer, using Charles Darwin's work as a comparison, said, "This survival of the fittest, which I have here, sought to express in mechanical terms, in that which Mr. Darwin has called natural selection, or the preservation of preferred races in the struggle for life. The statement is often misinterpreted and adopted by those who believe the superiority of one race over another, which is imaginary." Wow, I can't even spell, but that's imaginary. That's what I meant to say. George Simmel, 1858 to 1918. George Simmel was a German art critic who wrote widely on social and political issues as well. Simmel took an anti-positivism stance and addressed topics such as social conflict, the function of money, individual identity in city life, and the European fear of outsiders. Much of his work focused on micro-level theories and analyzed the dynamics of two-person and three-person groups. His work also emphasized individual culture as the creative capacities of individuals. Emile Durkheim. Emile Durkheim helped establish sociology as a formal academic discipline by establishing the first European department of sociology at the University of Bordeaux in 1895, and by publishing his Rules of the Sociological Method in 1895. In Division of Labor and Society, Durkheim further laid out his theory on how societies transformed from a primitive state into a capitalist industrial society. According to Durkheim, people rise to their proper levels in society based on merit. Durkheim believed that sociologists could study objective social facts. He also believed that through such studies, it would be possible to determine if a society was healthy or pathological. Healthy societies were stable, while pathological societies experienced a breakdown in social norms. In 1897, Durkheim attempted to demonstrate the effectiveness of his rules of social research when he published a work titled Suicide. Durkheim examined suicide statistics in different police districts to research differences between Catholic and Protestant communities. He distributed the differences to socio-religious forces rather than to individual or psychological causes. Max Weber, 1864 to 1920. Prominent sociologist Max Weber established a sociology department in Germany at the Ludwig Maximilians University of Munich in 1919. Weber wrote on many topics related to sociology, including political change in Russia and social forces that affect factory workers. He is known best for his 1904 book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. The theory that Weber sets forth in this book is still controversial. Some believe that Weber argued that the beliefs of many Protestants, especially Calvinists, led to the rise of capitalism. Others interpret it as simply claiming that the ideologies of capitalism Protestantism are complementary. Weber believed that it was difficult, if not impossible, to use the standard scientific methods to accurately predict the behavior of groups, as some sociologists hope to do. Weber argued that the influence of culture on human behavior had to be taken into account. This even applied to the researchers themselves, who should be aware of how their own cultural biases could influence their research. To deal with this problem, Weber and Wilhelm Dilthey introduced the concept of Verstehen, a German word that means to understand in a deep way. In seeking Verstehen, outside observers of a social world, an entire culture or small setting attempt to understand it from an insider's point of view. In the nature of social action, Weber described sociology as striving to interpret the meaning of social action and thereby give a causal explanation of the way in which action proceeds and the effects it produces. He and the other like-minded sociologists proposed a philosophy of anti-positivism, whereby social researchers would strive for subjectivity as they worked to represent social processes, cultural norms, and societal values. This approach led to some research methods whose aim was not to generalize or predict traditional insights, but to systematically gain an in-depth understanding of social worlds. The different approaches to research based on positivism or anti-positivism are often considered the foundation for the differences found today between the quantitative sociology and the qualitative sociology. Quantitative sociology uses statistical methods such as surveys with large numbers of participants. Researchers analyze data using statistical techniques to see if they can uncover patterns of human behavior. Qualitative sociology seeks to understand human behavior by learning about it through in-depth interviews, focus groups, and analysis of content sources, like books, magazines, journals, and popular media. Okay. Social policy and debate. Should we raise the minimum wage? During his hard-fought 2020 campaign, President Joe Biden promised Americans that he would raise the federal minimum wage. Opponents of raising the minimum wage argue that some workers would get larger paychecks while others would lose their jobs, and companies would be less likely to hire new workers because of the increased costs of paying them. Biden and other proponents of raising the minimum wage contend that some job loss would greatly offset by the positive effects of the standard of living of low-wage workers and reducing the income gap between rich and poor. But that's not what ends up happening, though. Because what ends up happening is the poorer get poorer. So the people who were making minimum wage and get fired no longer have a job. So now they don't make any money. And so now we have a larger poor class. But then, yeah, there's some people at the cost of some workers maybe getting more money. And that's because a lot of times those businesses will cut the hours. So they'll end up making the same amount, but they'll work less. Sociologists may consider the minimum wage issue from differing perspectives as well. How much of an impact would a minimum wage raise have for a single mother? Some might study the economic effects, such as her ability to pay bills and keep food on the table. Others might look at how reduced economic stress could improve family relationships. Some sociologists might research the impact on the status of small business owners. These could all be examples of public sociology, a branch of sociology that strives to bring sociological dialogue to public forums. The goal of public sociology are to increase understanding of the social factors that underlie social problems and assists in finding solutions. According to Michael Burroway, the challenge of public sociology is to engage multiple publics in multiple ways. Applying the discipline, American theorists and practitioners. In the early 1900s, sociology reached universities in the United States. William Sumner held the first professorship in sociology at Yale University. Franklin Giddings was the first full professor of sociology at Columbia University. Albion Small wrote the first sociology textbook. Early American sociologists tested and applied theories of the Europeans and became leaders in social research. Lester Ward developed social research methods and argued for the use of the scientific method and quantitative data to show the effectiveness of policies. In order for sociology to gain respectability in American academia, social researchers understood that they must adopt empirical approaches. W.E.B. Du Bois. William Edward Burghardt Du Bois, a Harvard-trained historian, pioneered the use of rigorous empirical methodology into sociology. His groundbreaking 1896 to 1897 study of the African American community in Philadelphia incorporated hundreds of interviews of Du Bois, conducted in order to document the familial and employment structures and assess the chief challenges of the community. These new comprehensive research methods stood in stark contrast to the less scientific practices of the time, which Du Bois critiqued as being similar to doing research as if though through the window of a moving car. His scientific approach became highly influential to entire schools of sociological study and is considered a forerunner to contemporary practices. Additionally, Du Bois' 1899 publication provided empirical evidence to challenge pseudoscientific ideas of biological racism, which had been used to justification to oppress people of different races. Du Bois also had a prominent role in the effort to increase rights for black people. Concerned for the slow pace of progress and advice from some of the black leaders to be more accommodating of racism, Du Bois became a leader in what would be later known as the Niagara Movement. In 1905, he and others drafted a declaration that called for immediate political, economic, and social equality for African Americans. A few years later, he helped found the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and served as its director of publications. Thorstein Veblen. After a brief stint as an unemployed college graduate, Thorstein Veblen began to study the economy through a social lens, writing about the leisure class, the business class, and other areas that touched on the idea of working itself. He researched the chronically unemployed, the currently unemployed, the working classes, and the working classes. Oh, typo. Jane Addams. Jane Addams founded Hull House, a center that served needy immigrants through social and educational programs while providing extensive opportunities for sociological research. Founded in Chicago, Addams worked closely with the University of Chicago's Chicago School of Sociology. This school of thought places much importance on environment in which relationships and behaviors develop. Research conducted at Hull House informed child labor, immigration, healthcare, and other areas of public policy. Charles Herbert Cooley. Charles Herbert Cooley posited that individuals compare themselves to others in order to check themselves against social standards and remain part of the group. Calling this idea the looking glass self, Cooley argued that we see ourselves by the reactions of others with whom we interact. If someone reacts positively to our behavior, theoretically, we will continue that behavior. He wrote substantially on what he saw as the order of life in Human Nature and the Social Order, followed by Social Organization in 1909. He was very concerned with the increasing individualism and competitiveness of United States society, fearing it would disrupt families as primary groups lost their importance, which is totally true. Definitely has happened. George Herbert Mead. George Herbert Mead was a philosopher and sociologist whose work focused on the ways in which the mind and the self were developed as the result of social processes. He argued that how an individual comes to view himself or herself is based on a very large extent on interactions with others. Though Mead adopted Cooley's concept of looking glasses, Mead felt that individuals' reaction to a positive or negative reflection depended on who the other was. Individuals that had the greatest impact on a person's life were significant to others, while generalized others were the organized and generalized attitude of a social group. Mead often shares the title of father of symbolic interactionism with Cooley and Irving Goffman. Robert E. Park. Robert E. Park is best known as the founder of social ecology. Attached to the Chicago School, Park focused on how individuals lived within their environment. One of the first sociologists to focus on ethnic minorities, he wrote on the Belgian oppression of the Congolese. When he returned to the U.S., he and Ernest Burgess researched the inner city to show that no matter who lived there, social chaos was prevalent. As such, it was not the residents who caused the chaos, but the environment. Cool. All right, I'm going to go ahead and call that for now. That was Sociology, Chapters 1, Sections 1 and 2.